Last week, I got a chance to see Dale Roberts' magnificent show at Philadelphia's Gross McCleaf Gallery. He is a master of encaustic, painting with pigment-infused hot wax. His paintings depict Europe and Northern Africa, as well as scenes near his home in Norristown. I talked to Dale by phone.
This show was very much about visual journeys, both going to places, but also the journey of the paint itself, taking the viewer through a series of skins of paint that eventually coalesce to become a rich memory of a journey that I've taken. We went to a number of places. I would sit at the spot and make sketches and take notes. And if one were to see the actual spot, you'd probably find that I'd put together things from various sources in order to come up with the image. Sometimes a space down the road a little bit or down the river a ways, just to make the image do what I wanted it to do. We had the opportunity to go to Green Olive Arts, Morocco. It's a place where artists can paint all day. So I was there for 5 weeks. Lisa was with me. We had a delightful time getting to rub shoulders with the culture, investigating the visual beauty of the place. A rich opportunity to really dig into a culture in a way that I'd never done before.
I asked him about an intriguing double still life.
That was a painting I had done in the studio there from the onion bunches that the Berber women would bring down from the hillsides every day, and they would sell them in the markets right outside the studio. Lisa went down and picked up a couple strings of onions, and I just thought they looked great. So hung them up, and then I was demonstrating to some Moroccan painters 2 very different methods to do the same subject. One is very much color submerged and then the light laying on top of it. And then the other had a whole different color program of the light filled with color. That landscape is near here. Went up Route 73 and just kept going. Lisa and I will often do that. We'll take a drive and then she'll drop me off. I'll make drawings and color studies. Believe it or not, it reminds me of very much where I grew up in upstate New York. I tend to be drawn to those sorts of places out of habit as well. And when my dad came to see the show, he was particularly moved by that for that very reason. That cathedral is in Prague. That was a particularly striking example of Gothic architecture that I just kept living with in my mind. The tour guide mentioned that faith had pretty well drained out of the city. We found that to be a sad thing, particularly since many of these beautiful structures were put up for that very reason. And now they're only kept stable by tourists and visitors because they have no congregation. So it struck me that here's this building that has no real life inside to speak of, and on the outside was this beautiful mosaic of the Last Judgment. It was so interesting to see the light hit that and send that message out across the centuries. I'll start out with black and white drawing that's pretty accurate. And then I'll move on to color studies. And then when I get onto the panel, there's no pre-drawing to speak of. I might lay out some big shapes, but then it's just moving the paint around. I was listening to some different kinds of music. When I was doing that background, I had Wagner going and I had some real heavier stuff. And so I just started grabbing cakes of cooled encaustic that I have lying around the studio and rubbing them into it. I was thinking about the color getting more away from reality as it went into the periphery of the painting. And so it happened organically. And you see it and you like it. If you don't like it, you scrape it away.
I asked Dale about his magical balancing of realism and abstraction.
My interest is in communicating with the visible world that we see every day. And yet it's the abstract underpinnings of my thinking and constructing of a painting which brings emphasis and a certain emotion, a certain way of producing a metaphor that you just don't get by directly rendering something. So I will often do renderings for my own benefit and practice in other media. But when it comes time to do the encaustic, it's like a whole other language comes to play. And it's starting to creep into some of my other work, Silverpoint and some other things that I've been playing with. It makes it interesting to do. And if it's interesting for me to do, it's hopefully going to be an interesting thing to look at.
One thinks of a representational painter as picking a subject first and then painting it. But Dale told me that his process is often quite different from this logical approach.
The painting itself started out completely abstract. I used ink and ink wash on the gesso panel and then painted casein into it. And then later on, I found something that suited that basic underpainting. And this gourd had a wonderful texture. So that was an interesting way of working the abstract with the real. And then worked into what was already there and had that dialogue going between ground and medium and image. I do a number of those sorts of things where I'll have panels kicking around the studio that maybe have a certain kind of color quality to them or texture or a series of shapes. And I might just like those shapes. And I'll look around throughout the year and maybe find something eventually that will work with that bed of paint. So it's a very backward way of composing. And it's something I do rather often. And I enjoy it because it's very freeing. It helps the work not to repeat itself. It's also a very economical way to work. I don't waste any paint. And at times I'll just, move the paint onto a panel and see what happens.
Dale's art was deeply influenced by Roger Anliker, his beloved teacher and mentor from Tyler School of Art.
I was a student of Roger Anliker's in 1979, and we became very close friends, and I was with him pretty much for the end of his days.
Roger stressed, above all things, the pursuit of excellence. I asked Dale about Roger's opinion of his work.
At one of my shows, my former professor, Roger Anliker, came and was speaking to my father-in-law, who also does my framing. He said, well, I have to tell you something. He said, encaustic is a wild beast, and Dale has it tamed and sitting at his feet. I mean, you come away from that, it's like, wow. So,
Roger was right. I, for one, believe that Dale Roberts' art, with its beauty, craftsmanship, and wellspring of painterly imagination, is a gift to the world.